Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm excited to speak today with my valued colleagues about sustainable procurement and carbon management. The presentation today will be about driving impact beyond compliance, which is a big topic for us as a company and as well for the corporations and organizations that we work with. I will give you a quick overview of our agenda for today. I will have a quick intro about our fantastic speakers. We then follow with sustainable procurement in practice with real life examples and project examples shared by Horváth, our partner here on the webinar today. We then touch base on carbon management in the supply chain and in how procurement teams can be enabled to act on supplier carbon data and make real impact and drive sustainability initiatives. And then we round the whole topic up with sustainability beyond regulations, as there's a lot going on in the EU, and you all know that deregulation is a big topic. But we want to show how the procurement function can be a strategic driver to drive real business value in your own corporations and make an impact on sustainability. So please welcome today's speaker. My name is Tom Hiller. I'm head of partner management here at Prewave. I'm responsible for all the partners that we have in our ecosystem. And in my professional career, which is more than 20 years now, I have always helped organizations, procurement organizations, to drive digitalization of processes through software solutions. Next to me is Thomas von Obernitz, who will be introducing himself now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm a project manager with Prewave and take care of our customers' pre-sales, but also after-sales activities when it comes to our carbon offering. So anything related to decarbonization or calculating your corporate carbon footprint is my responsibility with Prewave. And on to you, Benedikt.
Warm welcome also from my side. My name is Benedikt Pöhner. I'm part of the procurement and supplier management team at Horváth for now 7 years. At Horváth, I lead our sustainability practice and procurement in Germany, with a clear focus on helping companies embed sustainability across the entire procurement operating model. That means supporting our clients in a fast and pragmatic way, from setting the right sustainable procurement targets and implementing sustainable awarding criteria, to selecting the right tools and developing business cases that actually drive really measurable sustainability impact within the organization.
Hello and welcome also from my side. My name is Thomas Hinschel. I've been with Horváth for more than 10 years now. I'm part of the manufacturing industry team in Austria with a focus on procurement and sustainability topics. I've been supporting our customers in projects concerning procurement target operating models, procurement transformation, optimization and cost reduction, and most importantly for today in sustainability in procurement. Let us move on to the next page for a short introduction, Horváth, for those of you who do not know us yet. We are a management consultancy headquartered in Germany with more than 1,400 employees across more than 10 countries. Our core focus topics are transformation of companies, digitalization, and performance management. And as you can see, we have a quite broad product client portfolio across many different industries. So ranging from manufacturing to chemicals, life sciences, energy companies, and financial industries. And we consult our clients across all corporate functions and have specifically been awarded and recognized also for our procurement know-how and practices, as you can see with the awards here. Tom, back to you for a short introduction also on Prewave.
Thank you. At Prewave, we always have the ambition to make supply chains more resilient, more transparent, and more sustainability to make the world a better place to live in. As you can see, those 3 circles are interconnected in the middle. So sustainability, transparency, and resilience are moving closer together. And from the conversations that we have with our customer base, we see that they are getting even closer together and are interconnected. Our core technology, the Prewave AI, is the enabling software behind it that helps to create all the transparency that you require to foster a more resilient supply chain, understand the multi-tiers, and to know and understand where you have an impact on sustainability. The open platform is also enabled to be integrated in your procurement or supply chain management tools, where you do all the decision making and where you do all your daily work. So we are fully able to integrate in your procurement and supply chain architecture and IT landscape. The demand for sustainability comes from many sources. And if you follow news and if you are an expert in the topic, you know that, for example, Volkswagen is driving sustainability within their suppliers and their supplier network. But also politics are driving sustainability. There's, for example, the EU Green Deal, and that are different areas and topics that are driven from Brussels or from regulations in the different countries in Europe and worldwide. There's also an impact in finance and profitability. Banks, insurers, or investors are looking more and more on ESG factors and consider those in decisions and driving forward the topic for you. And finally, our very own civil society has an interest in making the world a better place, represented here by Fridays for Future, but also the climate activist movement that you all know from news and press are pushing more and more on sustainability topics and force corporations to be more sustainability and have a focus on CO2 reduction and decarbonization. And here is a fun way how your supply chain may look like, or the data in your supply chain. It's a vast and it's a very complex situation that you are working with. And sometimes it's also multi-tiered, and it feels like you need to find the needle in the haystack, or you can spot Waldo here on this crazy crowd, and maybe you have been able to spot Waldo here. I will give you maybe another second to look into it. But really finding the right data, finding the data that has an impact on your supply chain, that's one of the biggest challenge. And here's Waldo, if you didn't spot him so far. So this comes down now to what are the key challenges that you need to find answers for to make your supply chains more sustainable and more more resilient as well. And it really boils down to transparency in your supply chain, identification topics. It's about prioritization, because as you have seen on the Waldo picture, you will not be able to address everything at the same time. And then driving the right mitigation actions. Hence, you need answers to who are the suppliers, your tier ones or your end-tier suppliers that you need to focus on. What is it that you need to speak to those suppliers and have an impact on the risks that are associated with the suppliers in your overall supply network? Who and in which area do you need to put your focus on to address the right topics and have an impact and have the right impact on sustainability for your supply chain? And last but not least, what are the actions that you can undertake and that have a mid, long, or short-term impact on the whole sustainability topics? And to give a little bit more flesh to the bone here, I hand over to Horváth to bring some real project examples that they have been working on to make supply chains more sustainable and enable procurement teams to become a strategic function in the whole topic.
Thank you, Tom. So let's jump into the second chapter, looking now at our view on sustainable procurement in practice. There we want to give you some insights from different projects. But first, before we jump into the projects, we want to give you a view on our sustainable procurement framework that we structure with 7 dimensions that comprehensively cover all the requirements that we see for sustainable procurement. And let's quickly go through those dimensions. So on the left-hand side, we have strategy and targets to begin with. Here, we cover the question how sustainability in procurement fits into the general corporate strategy, also into the general sustainability strategy of your corporation, and what targets you derive for procurement to actively steer then sustainability within that function. The second topic is the regulatory compliance, which was definitely a larger topic in the past and focus in the past, not in focus for today. Here we have all the different sustainability requirements coming from regulations like CSDDD, EUDR, or CBAM. Third topic is then governance policies and rules. Here we define the different rules and governance instruments that we want to use to bring sustainability in procurement into life. And into practice, like, for example, a supplier code of conduct or also procurement policy. Fourth point regards the category and supplier management, where we define how we integrate sustainability in category strategies, where we define awarding criteria that we want to consider in our RFPs, or where we define also the supplier management processes where we need to consider sustainability. The fifth topic is organization, and here it's all about defining the organizational structures and roles that I need to support the daily application of sustainability, like interfaces towards my sustainability team, or also ambassadors in my decentral organization, to really bring it then also from a role point of view on the ground. The sixth topic is sixth dimension is then the IT systems. Here we define the tools and additional data sets that I require for sustainable procurement, and how do I link that kind of sustainability perspective now in the general procurement system architecture. So what additional systems do I want to use? Where do I have the interfaces? Where can I integrate them in my existing systems? And last but not least, we have one kind of core topic or main topic that we also highlight here, the carbon management and reduction, where it's all about the specific approach to drive scope 3 carbon reduction measures within where I want to really drive my supplier base to support me into decarbonization. And we won't go through all of those dimensions today, but we brought deep dives for 3 of them. So we will look into strategy, we will look into categories, and we will look then on category management, and then we will also look into carbon management and have a few practice examples from those dimensions. Let's start with the sustainability strategy. So as mentioned before, we derive our procurement sustainability strategy from our corporate or overarching sustainability strategy, like for many other functions. So also for production or R&D, it would be that way. We define it for procurement. We also want them to have procurement-specific targets and KPIs that we derive and define. Some examples shown below. It could be a target for a signed code of conduct by my suppliers. It could be a rate of qualified suppliers. It could be a sustainability score of my suppliers. When I know my targets, my KPIs, I then define also my governance mechanisms and my initiatives. How do I reach those targets? And how do I really want to make those targets actionable in the end? What are then now the requirements that I need to consider for my sustainable procurement targets? It can be external or internal requirements. If we start with the internal requirements, it's of course most strongly, of course, the strategic directives that I have from my top management. But it's also requirements that I have from my customers, my investors, my employees, other stakeholders. External requirements that I want to consider is industry trends, regulations, also national directives or EU directives, and international standards that are relevant to me. We can also, and that's what we brought here, we can also use normal strategic instruments like a strategy map to derive those targets and to derive them to the different dimensions, for example, of a balanced scorecard, as we can see here. So that is a quick glimpse on the strategy. Let's move on to category and supplier management. So at most customers, we see that supplier qualification is kind of the first process, the core process, when we talk about sustainability. So that's kind of the starting point where we always have the discussion. Yeah, I just need to find or need to get all the information in the supplier qualification, and then I'm fine. But in the end, the sustainability aspects are relevant across all the procurement core processes, as we can see here. And we have brought a few other examples where I need to consider sustainability aspects. If we look at the source to contract, at the strategic purchasing process, I can and should consider sustainability criteria also in my technical specification of my RFPs. So when sending out the RFPs, I also want to consider criteria also in the evaluation, so in the offer evaluation in the end, and have them as part of a financial and quality perspective, also adding a sustainability perspective and weighting when we compare offers of suppliers. We also, when we talk about the supplier lifecycle management, not only the qualification is relevant, but also the development of suppliers. So I want to consider sustainability aspects also as kind of targets. How do I increase the maturity level of my suppliers, and how do I develop them to become more sustainable? So also there, one important part. And last but not least, on the bottom, the contract lifecycle management. Also there, I want to, or I will also integrate environmental social clauses in my contracts and consider them in my agreements to ensure that my suppliers also ensure a sustainable behavior on their side. If we now look into the awarding criteria as one topic mentioned or one important topic for the category management, what we have done across many projects is we have prepared a catalog for us to filter and apply the awarding criteria for different categories. So we have them structured by categories, know then for each category what are relevant criteria, descriptions of those criteria, and have then also for each criterion a metric example. So how do I measure them, and what questions would I ask my supplier in an RFP, and can make then in our project use of that and really define a set of awarding criteria that are relevant. Maybe two examples that we brought with us is one example. If we look at the example above, we have one application for services, so for marketing or consulting services, where you could ask your supplier, where you could question, are they also considering low emission transport? So are they renting their services and consider low emission transport options like electric vehicles? Are they one example question that you can ask is, does the supplier ensure that the vehicles that he uses meet the Euro 6 emission standards or higher? Or on the right-hand side, what are metrics that you could query as part of an RFP, or also consider then for evaluation in the awarding, like the fleet share, or what is the fleet share of electric vehicles? What are CO2 emissions per employee or per project team member? What are the certificates that they can provide, or what distances do they need to cover? If you look at the bottom example for products and materials, here focus could be on single-use plastics, where you can then want to ensure that you minimize single-use plastics, or want to have them replaced by sustainable or biodegradable alternatives. And also those would be the metrics that you query. So what is your share of single-use plastics? Where do you make use of alternative materials? What could be a share of alternative materials? And of course, those are now individual awarding criteria that you can make use of. But how do you really get them into your processes? How do you ensure that they're really anchored? And also here we have made quite good experiences with really defining category-specific use cases. So we think about specific use cases. In our example here, it's a tender for contracting civil engineering services for underground works. define a scope of application, so it's the tender. It could also be criteria for supplier long listing or for contracting. In this case, it's a tender. And then out of kind of a long list of criteria and metrics, we already pre-select some of those metrics and make a suggestion for the weighting of those criteria within an offer evaluation process that are kind of realistic for a real use case. And that way we make it easier for the strategic buyers, and they have really a ready-to-use set of awarding criteria considering sustainability aspects when they start the next tender in that category. So that covers the second deep dive. Let's move to the third deep dive that we brought with us. And this one is about carbon management and reduction. Here, the primary goal of procurement is to measure and track the CO2 reductions within the supplier base, and then also ensure that the suppliers proactively contribute to your decarbonization with their scope 3 emissions that you have to consider and report on. And how do we work with that? Usually we have a supplier engagement playbook or a concept that we develop where we have a structured approach, where we start with the supplier clustering, where we want to first prioritize the suppliers that we want to focus on in the first place. Then we assess the maturity level of those suppliers and define the target picture. Where do we want to develop them? And last but not least, we have then the monitoring and performance management, where we regularly then monitor the progress and follow up. And let's now go through those 3 steps to give a little bit more insights on those. For the supplier clustering, here we start with the clustering of suppliers in 3 dimensions. One dimension being the spend, so kind of an ABC segmentation. The second dimension being then the scope 3 emissions of the respective supplier. And the third dimension is the criticality of this category that the supplier delivers goods or services in. And that way we can identify and prioritize those suppliers where we have the biggest lever for decarbonization, and have then also really customer specific focus area that we want to look at. And you can also then, based on the prioritization, of course, phase the different or cluster the suppliers into different groups, and then tackle them step by step, thereby increasing the suppliers that you have in your engagement process. The second step is then the maturity. So here we first want to assess the supplier maturity when it comes to carbon management. Having here an exemplary questionnaire, where we want to understand when can the supplier provide climate data, what information on scope 1 and 2 emissions can he provide, how proactively does he manage those emissions, how do they determine their own scope 3 emissions, are they SBTi committed already, do they have targets, what measures are they already working on to reduce emissions on their side, or also what do they have a product carbon footprint available, do they have even customer specific emission data available, and can they provide that? And based on that maturity level, we understand, okay, what is the maturity of the supplier? And then we define a target level where do we want to develop the supplier to, and what initiatives and measures do we need to take to bring the supplier to that level, or what initiatives do we need to request so he moves to that higher maturity. And that's then the third step, the monitoring and performance management, where we really start in the supplier engagement process. Here we first start, of course, with an information towards the supplier. What do we expect from them? Then we request information from the supplier, track then the progress within those initiatives. We will definitely have follow-up requests. In the end, we can check the results and monitor and improve the process. So it's kind of then also, on the one hand, of course, continuous improvement to step by step then improve rather step by step reduce the carbon emissions, and also, as mentioned before, increase the scope of suppliers that are managed within that engagement process. And how do I, in this last step, for that monitoring and tracking, I can define different KPIs and track them in a dashboard. And this brings us now to Prewave as a potential solution and tool provider for those topics. And with that, I hand over to you, Thomas, for the next chapter.
Thank you. Yes, so carbon management in the supply chain. So how can we then actually enable also suppliers to share such data with you to make it more actionable? So maybe before that, just taking a step back, I think in this room, it's all clear for everybody. But just the focus on Scope 3 and the role of procurement and supply engagement is really crucial, because the typical company, there's the vast majority of emission comes from Scope 3, and then if the spend or the Scope 3.1, which is the purchased goods and materials, is not targeted appropriately, there's not really any way towards effective decarbonization. So if then the focus is only Scope 1 and 2, that is fine, but it will have certain limitations. So how we then think about it is actually that there is a certain rethinking of the approach necessary. So and what we try to enable is that you go away from manual and quite untargeted questionnaire-based approaches to really focus, as also Thomas just said, on the most relevant ones, so that you have within a few minutes, hours, a result that can indicate what are the carbon hotspots in the supply chain, that you create one single source of truth. So the Prewave platform as the one single source of truth of the supplier's emissions, and then focus on the most impactful ones, and therefore creating really a structured process that you can not only embed at a later stage, but across the entire process of the supplier life cycle. So from, as Thomas said, the awarding criteria where you request PCF data and enable your suppliers to calculate such, all the way to improvement and performance management, trying to improve their PCF values. But then question is always, okay, where do we start? So how do we get to this segmentation fairly quickly, so that we are not end up baselining for half a year and don't really have time to act on initiatives? And that's really where we come into play at 2 and also at the later stage. So, but focus is the baselining and refinement. So with Prewave, we typically create the baseline based on available spend or material information within a few days, if not even hours, and not in a matter of months. So you can use readily available accounting data to assess your full supply chain, and based on or leveraging our AI, have a result, then refine that result using available material level data, meaning you take out suppliers where you have, okay, this is the tons of aluminum, steel, or other materials that you source from them, and use the material that was sourced instead of the spend. And thereby you get to a result where you then can identify who are the hotspots, who are the suppliers that really are the dark red ones or the orange ones, to then request primary data from those suppliers. And that is not just a request via Prewave, but we enable the suppliers to calculate a PCF with just using a few data points, instead of requesting a fully fledged Catena X or Pact Pathfinder PCF number. To then be able at that point to actually know this data, have verified data, and go into the supply development and co-development. So be it initiatives that you push onto the suppliers, try to make them improve something, but also in a collaborative way. So what are elements where designs may change, where internally you can leverage the data to, in product designs, also improve emissions. So how that looks like in the platform is really one of the key elements that we provide, and is really bringing out or leveraging the AI that we have. And you see here just a screenshot to give you some tangible idea how that would look like. So a supplier receives the requests, and then all they have to do is upload the BOM information. So that is something that typically suppliers have. Then adding combustion, electricity, and the full output for a plant, and then they have a result. It's not a perfect PCF, yes, that's true, but this PCF is kind of the starting point that you can start building on, and gives you also across multiple suppliers similar methodology and a similar PCF result to compare with, to then really use such data in the supplier life cycle. And that is also where we are fully aware of, where then we collaborate with Horváth and partners as an example to actually elevate this change. And as Prewave are then the tech element, but there's also other elements required. So there's a process element that where we can share best practices, but there's always a certain level of or a certain limitation for us as a software provider. But to really get the most value out of a software, you need to change processes and train people over a longer period of time as well, because software alone will not solve this Scope 3 dilemma or really drive the most change out of it. And how could that look like, or how are we in discussions with our customers this stage, and how can you actually use this PCF calculation in the supplier life cycle? So it's really across the full board, basically. So from qualification, so you can use the Prewave hotspot analysis, so the first part of the funnel that I just showed, to identify, is that actually a supplier that where the carbon topic, CO2 emissions, are a relevant element. And then as part of the RFP process, request suppliers to calculate with Prewave a PCF, share this information so that you have one standard to compare across suppliers, because that is this limitation that we currently see in many cases, that yes, there's a number shared per product, there's an X amount of emissions embedded. However, there's no way to actually verify or to be able to compare them across suppliers necessarily. Then in contracting, so that these PCF values and the lever to request the data finds the way there, and also then being able to act on it in performance management, so that you request it on a monthly, quarterly, in the first stage, possibly on a yearly basis, to then also optimize. So to really go together with the supplier down this decarbonization pathway to achieve your Scope 3 reduction targets, but also then enable the supplier to achieve them, because in a lot of cases they actually do not have the PCF data available, and that's a value that you can provide and we can provide as a software provider to them. And this just as a kind of food for thought. It's not necessarily that we always start with this as is and fully roll it out across the full scope, but typically start with a few suppliers, really the carbon hotspots in the supply chain, to learn from these first interactions, and then expand to the broader supply base to really live the change and leverage the data that you get out.
Okay. Then let me take over the last chapter for the day. As we now move into our final chapter, we now want to explore how procurement can generate real impact and position itself as an active driver of sustainability. And the true opportunity here lies in establishing procurement as a strategic function and one that delivers measurable sustainable business impact, also including and considering the carbon management topics we just talked about. But for the introduction of this chapter, I would like to start with a rather unusual perspective for a sustainability-focused webinar, but for a clear reason I'm going to tell you. Because here on this slide, you can see the results of the 2025 Horváth CXO study, which surveys more than 1,000 CXOs every year about their strategic priorities. And what developments do we unfortunately observe? Since 2021, sustainability has lost, unfortunately, a significant relevance on the top management agenda. And the ecological sustainability topic has dropped far behind, while topics such as improving cost and profit structures, digital transformation, and cybersecurity now dominate the top 3 priorities. But this development means that procurement and supply chain functions now face an even greater challenge in receiving valuable budgets and capacities to implement sustainability aspects. But now the question comes up, how can procurement now step back into the spotlight? And we see in the first place one big chance, and that's by demonstrating sustainable value creation through tangible business cases, showing that sustainability is not just a cost factor, but a driver of measurable impact and long-term competitiveness. And those sustainable business cases are needed for the reports to the top management to help regain relevance for the sustainability topics. And to show you how such business cases can look like, we consolidated some examples from the past with measurable business impact from past projects of the last 2 to 3 years. In daily business, we can say that we can structure those sustainable business cases into 3 main pillars. Number 1 on the left-hand side is the pillar where business cases are developed mainly independently by the procurement function. In the middle, pillar number 2, here we do see cases that are created together with the supplier. So procurement actively working together in terms of a supplier collaboration to find those sustainable business cases with a real impact on the business. And number 3 on the right-hand side are business cases where procurement drives active collaboration with internal functions within the organization, meaning with R&D and with sales and with other supply chain relevant functions to find and define business cases where cost savings can be actively communicated. And let me just point out a few highlights from selected pillars. On the left-hand side, pillar 1, where procurement stands as the main driver, and the first example comes from the chemical industry. And here procurement identified the possibility that cleaning expensive filters with a service provider every year instead of replacing it every 3 years could double the filter's lifespan. And this helped to avoid unnecessary waste and generated direct savings within the procurement department, which were able to be reported to the top management. A second example on the left-hand side is where procurement was able to buy refurbished equipment such as pumps or motors by reusing high-quality refurbished products. And the client here was able to save a double-digit percentage in pumps or motor costs. Looking into the middle, where procurement must collaborate with suppliers, we also see different business cases. And one strong case was identified in the area of packaging redesign, which is usually one of the areas we would recommend always to look in. And together with the supplier, procurement was able to optimize the packaging design, which has led to a reduction of used material and simplified the disposal, also leading to CO2 emission reductions and savings of disposal costs. Another case is route optimization, always a classic case which can nearly be found for all manufacturing companies. And by jointly analyzing transport flows directly with the suppliers, the logistic category manager was able to consolidate deliveries and was able to directly reduce the transportation costs, while at the same time obviously lowering emissions, which he was able to track within his tool and also report to the top management. On the right-hand side, collaboration with internal function. Also, one of my favorite examples comes from the aviation industries. And here, together with the internal functions, procurement identified selected articles to be excluded and to reduce the overall aircraft cabin weight. And even with just a few kilograms of less per seat, translated directly into major fuel savings, reducing both CO2 emissions and operating costs. And just to sum this up, one great starting point is always to think in those 3 different clusters and try to identify different business cases, make them transparent, and report them within your company and generate lighthouse cases. And to end this chapter, we want to show you also how such a business case could be presented to the top management. And for this, we brought one of the highlight cases from this year, which was used by one of our clients as a lighthouse case to promote sustainability within procurement. And this is an example which procurement was able to develop nearly entirely on its own with selected help from the internal R&D department without the need of supplier collaboration. And it comes from the energy industry and focuses on the procurement of refurbished pumps for industry plants. And what did they report? First, obviously the concept. Instead of buying brand new pumps, the client chose to procure refurbished equipment, and these pumps were fully tested, offered the same quality and performance as the new products, but came at a significantly lower cost. The second point, which should also be reported, is the benefits. On the one hand side, the financial perspective. So the refurbishment reduced purchase prices and created cost savings of up to 25% for each pump. But you can also report the environmental perspective, because refurbishment reduced, because the material usage was cut by up to 40% and waste volumes was also substantially reduced by using those refurbished pumps procured. And now coming to the last point is the strategic impact, which can also be reported and should always match one of the larger overall sustainability targets of your company. And here, the strategic impact was beyond costs and operations, because this approach strengthens the circular economy approach within the organization by reusing resources and avoiding unnecessary production of new equipment. So this overall case was used as a lighthouse initiative and transparency reported within the organization to show how circular economy and procurement can bring a value to sustainability as an overall target. Now jumping to our last slide of the day and to our final takeaway, let me maybe briefly now summarize our recommendations at the end of our webinar, which you should have as a takeaway and maybe take into your procurement or sustainability function as overall recommendation. So first, make sustainability as a core criteria in procurement, not just a side note, but a decision driver throughout the supplier lifecycle, like Thomas already explained in an example. For example, use it as a mandatory awarding criteria, maybe not for all categories at the start, but for your most important categories where it could have the biggest impact. Secondly, invest in better data transparency, but also remember it's not about drowning in different dashboards. It's about focusing on a few metrics that truly matter to drive sustainability within your organization. And third, strengthen your supplier engagement, work with them, not against them, and co-create business cases that deliver real value and can be reported to the top management to bring back the spotlight to sustainability where it should belong, also in the long term. And fourth, which will also come up, see regulatory changes as the upcoming CSDDD in the next few years, not as a burden, but as an opportunity, because they often come with resources and budgets attached, which can also be used for other sustainability projects and aspects which then can be anchored within the supply chain or procurement function. And finally, set the right incentives, because let's face it, awareness alone doesn't move the needle. People need a reason to act. And with this, we'll close the content part of today's session. And thank you very much for joining us and for staying engaged until the end of today's session.